Somehow it's already August, which means we have to wrap up July and talk about all the books that we've read last month. Ready? Hey everyone, Fina here from Fina Reads. Welcome back to my channel. Today with my second half of July wrap-up, which means we're wrapping up July completely with some quick stats, starting with the number of books I read, which is 8 in the whole month of July. One of those books was a DNF, and I read a total of 2,391 pages, which is less than what I usually do. Usually I'm more in the 3,000 page range, but you know what? I had a bunch of good books, so that makes up for it. I finished a total of 4 fantasy books, 2 sci-fi, 1 thriller, and then the DNF book, which by the way was more like a soft DNF. I will definitely read it. I was just not in the right headspace early in July for that book, and that was The Unworthy, which is kind of like a dystopian horror, I believe. I'm not 100% sure what genre that book falls under. So in the first half of July, I read book 8 in the Green Rider series, which is Falling in a Sea of Stars. I finished the Veilborn series. I'm so excited that I finished a series this month. I read Before the Coffee Got Cold, and I read the John Mars book of the month, which was a thriller, Her Last Move. If you're interested in my thoughts in those books, hop on over to my first half of July wrap-up and listen to that if you haven't already. And then for the rest of the month, I finished a novella and a novel in the same series, which is Empire's End and Dreams of the Fallen by A.S. Callworth. And I caught up on a series. I read the last currently published book in the series, which is Eldryan Elders in the Last Luminian Saga. Those 3 books I want to talk about today. And then I will also talk about the book that I started reading in July that I'm taking over into August, what my plans are for August as well, and a little bit of book mail. All right, let's start with A.S. Callworth, which was a longer read for me. So for the novella and the novel, it took me nearly 2 weeks to read it. It was a slow read, even though it's together just about 500 pages, a little bit over. So, you know, for a seasoned fantasy reader, not really a whole lot of pages, but it was just, you know, I needed to take my time with this book. It was a bit more evolved than I thought it would be, which is fine though. So before I go any further on that one, first up, I got Dreams of the Fallen as an e-arc from the author, but since you can see that I'm holding the paperback in my hand, which is always a good sign for you that I really like the book and bought myself a paperback copy, that's what I did. So I really like the book. And then the novella you can download for free on the author's website if that is something you're interested in. So, but what are those two about, right? Let's start with the novella. The novella is about Zarathustra, who is close to the emperor. We are in a kind of Roman-inspired fantasy world. So you have an emperor, you have a court, you have senators, and then you have a life which is akin to early Roman time. You have a race called Kosa who are slaves. They are used as warriors. They are used to help with farming and whatnot. And the most important thing about these is that they don't have any free will. So they are being ordered around by the humans in the realm. Till the day where Zarathustra is called to a farmer's house where a Kosa murdered a human, something that is supposed to not be possible. So he's sitting there and is like trying to figure out what had happened, why that happened, because theoretically someone must have ordered the Corsair to do that, but then they are not allowed to harm humans. So there's a lot of interesting conflict just because of that already going on. But then as you dive into the novella, you actually learn a lot more about the Corsair, where they're coming from, and why they're behaving the way they're behaving right now. Very important setup then for the novel. Don't be arrogant like I was. Like I started actually reading the novel. I didn't even know there was a novella before. Well, I did because he says it right at the beginning of the book that you might want to read the novella for. Even some of the reviews are saying you should read the novella first. But you know, I was arrogant and decided, no, I'm just jumping into this right here because I have the e-arc here. So why shouldn't I read this first? Well, 20% into the book, I knew why. I reached out to the author and was like, am I supposed to be confused? Because I really am. And then I started reading the novella, which cleared up a lot of stuff. And the author also said, yes, the beginning up till about chapter 10 is a bit more ambiguous. And then starting chapter 10, pieces are starting to fall in line and you're starting to get it. And that's then what happened. And I pinged him while I was in chapter 9, so I should have just waited a little bit longer. Anyway, this plays a couple of hundred years after the novella. We are following two POVs mainly here. There are a couple of others, but there are two POVs that we are following mainly. One is Adela, who is a Corsa, and one is Cassius, who is a human. And it all starts with Adela being on the run. She has to flee the city. Her mentor, Gretchen, is kind of helping her pack her lizard. They're riding lizards, which I think is really cool. And to get out of the city because something happened with her inner power that wasn't supposed to happen, that she can't control. And since magic like this is not supposed to exist, she is in huge danger. So she grabs all her stuff and runs into the desert and basically gets told by her mentor, like, follow your destiny, like go where we talked about and follow your destiny. You play an important role in this life. And then we learn also that Gretchen is kind of a rebellion leader because he doesn't believe that the new gods, the elders, are the ones that should be leading them, but it should rather be the old gods. But he doesn't really know who the old gods are. And then we have Cassius, who is a human. He is, again, someone close to the emperor. The king was on a mission, and one of his servants is coming back completely out of breath and everything. It's like, the king got murdered, the king got murdered. And Cassius is now in a place where he has to now govern the kingdom till they figured out who the next emperor is, who the next ruler is. And it's a mess because there's a lot of political backstabbing going on, a lot of scheming for the throne. Darktown, kind of the poorer region of the city, where the main setting is, kind of starting to rebel and wanting to come up, and all sorts of things are happening. And Cassius is completely overwhelmed. He doesn't want to be in this situation. He is kind of like, what is happening here? Trying to figure out who are his friends, who are his not so much friends, and just trying to deal with the situation. That's kind of the setup. So what I love about this book is that you get two POVs, like the two opposing sides, and you get a detailed view into their beliefs and why their thoughts are the way they are. And of course, like it is with tropes like this, not everything is the way you think it is. So there's a lot to uncover throughout the story. Listen, I ate this up. I love this so much. This is kind of the type of dark and gritty fantasy that I love, that is not completely overdone and pretentious. It's well written. The characters are so fascinating. I love both Dila and Cassius. Cassius is my favorite, I have to say. He made some interesting decisions and he went into some interesting directions and he had some interesting outbursts, I have to say. But he is my favorite. But Dila has like a naive touch to her, which makes her very endearing as well. Anyway, a lot of great character work is what I'm trying to say. The world, while kept relatively contained, is incredibly fascinating. The glimpses of magic that we're getting in both the novella and the novel are very fascinating. I'm definitely interested to see more in that realm. You can read this kind of as a standalone. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be a series or whatnot, but it has a very finite ending, even though there are some storytelling strings, plot strings. I can't talk right now, but there's some still open, but it's not a cliffhanger, if that makes any sense. And then the book that I read that caught me up on the series, which is supposed to be 13 books, and currently book 5 is the one being published. That is Eldryan Elders by S.G. Blaze, which is book 5 in the last Luminian series. This is a YA sci-fi with heavy fantasy elements that I've been enjoying throughout the year. They are very quick reads, kind of more popcorny reads with great characters, great action, great kind of found family parts in it. It's going to be a bit harder to talk with you about this book because I don't want to spoil the series, but generally what The Last Luminian is about, it's about Lilla, who is a rebel princess on the planet of Una, and in the first book it all starts out with her trying to help the rebels that are living on her planet, who are being oppressed by her father, the king, the Maha of the planet. So it's an interesting dynamic with her being the princess but helping the rebels. You get to know a lot of her friends, unlikely allies that you get to meet. And then relatively quickly by the end of book 1 and then into the rest of the series so far, the universe is opening up like crazy and you're traveling from planet to planet. You meet a bunch of other races throughout the 7 galaxies, which is what this universe is called. And essentially it's about her being the chosen one. And I don't want to give you too much detail because that's what you're figuring out in book 1, right? So her being the chosen one, she has a task to basically save the world. and how she goes about it. She's completely inexperienced. She is the last Luminian, which also makes it very challenging because she can't really learn from other Luminians as to what it means to be the chosen one in that case. It's part of her figuring out what her role is in this whole scenario that we're dealing with here, but also figuring out what it means to be a Luminian. So like kind of an identity, not crisis, but figuring out who you are as part of the big story. A lot of stuff is thrown at her, but the found family aspect is really strong and she can rely on her friends. And it's just such a fantastic rebel story, super fast paced, great popcorn read with a lot of great elements from the magic system to the different races that S.G. Blaze came up with, to Lilla herself and her history. There are just so many great aspects in here, and it's such a unique world, such a unique reading experience that, yeah, I'm so glad that I found this and I cannot wait for book 6. Just know it's a bit younger, so it's a YA series. There's a very slight hint of romance here, but it's really not on the forefront. The important part is the sci-fi fantasy story, and this one was fantastic. This was probably so far my favorite entry in the series. I'm saying this carefully because I might have to think about it a little bit. This one gave you a lot of explanation on the Luminians and the history of the Luminians, while at the same time moving the big issue forward quite a bit. And just that planet that they are on and the civilization that is living on that planet and has been living there for many, many, many years is just also very fascinating and full of like morally gray elements, which is very interesting. And the reveal was just fantastic. Like all the magic that happened in this book was just fantastic. So this was kind of a great, really fast-paced read after the after the much slower fantasy that I read right before, and it got me right back into things. So that was the last book that I actually finished in the month of July. And then I started reading something not entirely different, but quite different, because I switched to a nonfiction, and that is The Greatest Night by Thomas Esbridge. This is a nonfiction about one of the more famous knights back in medieval history between 1100 and a little bit and 1200 a little bit, called William Marshall, who served around 5 different monarchs in that time. This book is based out of one of the first biographies that were written back in 1200 something rather, about someone else than a monarch, which makes him as a knight kind of interesting from a historical perspective. And the book essentially tells his story, but gives you a lot of insights about the time in general as well. So there's a lot of information about the kings that were reigning back at that point, about how life was, and then also a lot about knighthood and how this whole concept of knight in shining armor came to be. So a lot of great information, as you can see. You know, I tabbed a lot of interesting tidbits, like, for example, that in tournaments back then, like knight tournaments back then, people were not killed, but people were taken hostage and then sold out for ransom. And that's kind of how they made their money back then. And I thought, you know, interesting little tidbits like that. So far is a fantastic read, and I'm eating this up right now. And that leads me into the book mail section, because I picked this book up due to the recommendation of a new to me booktuber. He is not new. He has been on BookTube for quite some time, but I have never heard of him before. And that's Michael Kist, who seems to be reading mostly history books. And I actually got the recommendation for this off of one of his videos. It's like history books for beginners or something like that. And that's where I also picked up 2 other books. One is Tamim Ansari's Destiny Disrupted, A History of the World Through Islamic Eyes, which he said is a great summary of the Islamic history from a more Western author, something that I'm really interested in because my knowledge is definitely lacking of that area of history. And then the other one that I picked up from the video is A Fatal Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, Murder in Ancient Rome by Emma Southern. Medieval Europe and like the Roman Empire are times I'm very interested in. Over my years read a lot. I studied Latin way back then, where I learned a lot about Rome and like how Rome was founded, Roman mythology, all that kind of stuff. And I find that area and area of history very interesting. So I thought this was kind of a fun sounding book that I definitely want to give a try. And then same channel, but it was a different video. He also recommended Persians, The Age of of The Great Kings by Lloyd Llewellyn Jones. And similar to the more Islamic history, Persian history is also something that I'm severely lacking and I want to learn more of. And this sounded like a great introduction into this. I'm excited. I mean, so far, the one book that I'm reading is definitely a hit. So I'm excited to check out the other books as well. And then something completely nonfiction. We're back to fantasy. I got myself a copy of The Baker's Boy and A Man Betrayed by J.V. Jones, which are book 1 and 2 in the Book of Words. And I got them in Mars Market paperback, which you probably never see on my channel because I don't like reading Mars Market paperbacks. But that's the only way you can get them. Used as Mars Market paperbacks, or you spend a shit ton of money for hardcover copies of some sort. And the reason I picked them up, I can't tell you quite yet, but there's something in the works where these, at least the first book, is relevant. So don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you want to hear more about that. All right, so what's next for the month of August? I have been going away more and more from putting together TBRs. I have a couple of books that I have to get to. What I have to read is the next John Mars book in our John Mars read-along. We're back to SciFi in August, which is The Marriage Act, book 4 in the One Universe. That is the book that started it all for me because I got that as a gift from Jake and Stacy for my birthday last year. And Stacy immediately said, like, don't read this one. You have to read the whole other thing first. And then somehow we started talking and ended up at a read-along for all the John Mars books. And now I'm finally reading this one. I'm very excited for this one. The other one that I'm also very excited about is a buddy read together with Nico from Nico's Books Reviews. We are reading Sarah Douglas's The Wayfarer Redemption. I don't know much about it. The only thing is that I know after reading the description is that it sounds like a cheesy good old fantasy. So I said, yep, I'm in. I'm reading this with you as well. I don't know if it's like part of his Patreon read this month or whatnot, but it's happening on his channel and I'm just, inserting myself into that one. And then the third book that I would love to get to in August, this is not a must, but I kind of would love to get to, is book 2 in the Witch Roots duology by Kate Elliott, which is A Nameless Land. I've received an ARC from that. And that's the second book that is coming out in November 2025 this year. I'm super excited for that because I loved Witch Roads and I cannot wait to hear how this story continues because the ending was devastating. I need to know how it continues and if, certain things are being resolved or if she lets us sit with that. I mean, nah. So yeah, I have an urge to read this one, but that's it. That's my July wrap-up. What was your favorite book in July? What books did you enjoy reading in the last month? What are you excited for in August? Let me know down in the comments. Again, don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you want to see how my August then turns out and what I think about the books that I want to read in the month of August. And in the meantime, you can watch this video over here. And then I hope you have an amazing rest of your day and we'll see you soon with my next video. Bye!